So it is Epiphany, January 6th. So it's only 1 out of 7 years that we get a chance really to worship on the actual day of Epiphany. And we have a sense of what that is. We talk about having an epiphany, and it really is that kind of light bulb that comes on a next fresh step for us. And that's really what we're looking for each and every year when we go through the journey of the season of Epiphany. So this is the time when the Magi show up. This is how we recognize them, January 6th. And to just make sure that we all kind of have the basic story set correctly. Because, especially as we have pageants and all those sorts of things through the years, we take some, if you will, literary license, and people have made assumptions to make the story complete and serviceable. But there are things that we really don't know necessarily from the Bible, including we don't know that there were 3 wise men. We know that there were at least 2 because it's a plural, but there is no reference whatsoever to exactly how many there were. Why do we say 3? Well, there were 3 different gifts. And so we just kind of assume that, I mean, you've seen the pictures, right? Somehow we have photos, each guy carrying his little pot of myrrh or something, you know, and that's what it looks like. Well, and so we sing like We Three Kings and all of this. That's fine, but it isn't necessarily exactly 3 people. Could be 1 less, it could be more. And 2, lots of times we tend to think that the wise men show up at the actual infant Jesus laying there in the manger, and that clearly is not so. We know that from essentially those words that I just read from Matthew 2, where it says, he's now called a child. He's not called an infant anymore. And they're not in an inn, they are in a house. So for whatever reason, maybe because they probably had family there, they had to come to Bethlehem for the census. Well, that meant that Joseph was from that area, so he probably had some family there, and they helped with the raising of Jesus, one would imagine, probably. Anyway, they're still there. And the piece de resistance is that when we hear about Herod, and it literally says that he got the timing of the appearance of the star from the wise men, and that then to get rid of this potential troublemaker king of the Jews, wannabe, he has the boys killed that are under 3 years of age. And so that too gives you a bit of a hint that, well, this could be a year or even 2 later perhaps than the actual birth of Jesus. And to be thinking about these guys, they are a curious group. We really don't know who they are. People have fun kind of supposing this or that. We call them the Magi. That's kind of the safe word because we don't know what a Magi is. I mean, all that is fair to say we don't know who these guys are. We call them wise men, but that's redundant when you say wise men. Yeah, you're more awake than the 9 o'clock people. I'm proud of you. That's why we have 10:30 worship. Give you a chance to wake up. Astrologers, some people, get a little off base. I mean, they're watching the stars. What is this? Okay. All sorts of different kinds of things. Sort of Eastern priests, or we call them We Three Kings. Well, we really don't know that they're kings. Maybe they were. I don't know. Who are these people? What role do they play? Well, it is pivotal for how we come to understand Epiphany. It gives us an open door into saying, oh, because from my vantage point, Epiphany is this so what? A wonderful so what. But otherwise we just have a cute, cuddly story of Christmas that isn't this nice, that God chooses to become human in this fragile infant. Now what? This is the awesome part of it, that we get 2020 hindsight, of course, 2,000 years later, and we go, oh, okay, this is where this all fits together as best we can as human-type people. And so we will see that there are really kind of 2 main things that are happening with Epiphany. One is an imagery. Jesus will say he is the light of the world that has come to shine in the darkness. Well, Epiphany literally shows up at like when we are really getting tired of all of the darkness. At this time of year, well, we're getting a little more light every day, but we've had so many days now that we've had all this darkness, and it's cold, and people are sick, and all this kind of stuff. So right about this time of year, we're kind of dreary, literally. And so into that, it's a perfect time to say, Jesus is the light of the world. Now, that's the literal part. But obviously, the figurative is more significant in that in the darkness of our lives, whatever that is, and we all understand that there are pieces in our lives, the experience that we have sometimes through no fault of our own, sometimes we have a part in it, whatever it is, there is this darkness. And into that is the promise of Jesus that he comes to bring light. That all of that is dark, all of that just isn't quite right, is being illuminated. And that we know, whatever it is, I mean, when Jesus says this image, he understands that for us, darkness is potentially scary. We don't know what's in the dark. It seems that more often, things that are unsavory happen in darkness. And so, in this sense, the epiphany of God is to come and take care of the darkness. Awesome. But that's just part one. The other is a more theological impression, in that Epiphany is officially the manifestation of Jesus to the world. Okay, what does that mean? Well, that kind of gets back to my so what. What difference does it make that God comes into the world in this form of Jesus, this God human? What is this going to do? Does it do anything, or is it just a fun story? No. And we're going to track this. This is a little foreshadowing for us, because we know the end of the story. That we're going to get to that Lent that comes after Epiphany, and there's going to be the trial of Jesus. He's going to be abandoned, and he's going to be tortured, and all because, basically, well, one, he claims to be God, and two, he doesn't see the role of the Messiah as just dealing with the earthly reality of that moment in time, in one space, no less. Now, do we look for God to do that? Sure. In even my own little world, I hope for God to show up. And he will, and he wants us to pray like that. But that wasn't the foundational reason for why God came and did what he did in this human infant Jesus that now is growing up. It is to reconcile God with his people. Because that really is the whole story of the Bible. All God wants, as one who defines himself as love, is to have that kind of relationship with people. But as he finds out, as love is, it has to have that ability to be rejected. And it gets rejected rather soundly. And it seems that humans just can't ever ultimately grab a hold of God 100% themselves. So that's the story of Jesus. That Jesus comes to bring that gift of salvation. That's really what salvation is. It really isn't, oh, we get to go to heaven when we die. I guess that's true, but that's not salvation. Salvation is that we are connected to God in that loving relationship, beginning now and through all eternity. That's the gift that comes in this Jesus. And that's what we celebrate at Epiphany, and that's what we internalize and evaluate for this moment in time in our lives when maybe there is literal darkness for sure, and maybe there's some figurative darkness in our lives. How can we discover this Jesus in a new and fresh way as his Spirit moves in our lives and brings light into whatever that darkness is? Cool. So you'll notice that the Magi do bring gifts to Jesus. I said it at 9 o'clock, and it's fun. You know, all of you Facebook people, you know, you women over age 55, and every year it's the same thing. You go, yes, you know, if it was wise women, they would have brought diapers, right? Oh, you got to do that every year. All right, because they're bringing gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And you go, what? What are they thinking? Well, at one level, it's the gifts for a king. At another level, the kind of theological assumption is like the perfumes and things like that are burial type gifts. And so there is this another foreshadowing, a hint of what is to come. of the suffering that is down the road here for Jesus. So those are the best explanations for why these guys bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But it's always a curiosity to me how we take Christmas then and put such a big emphasis on gifts to one another. And yes, we even kind of say, what are you getting for Christmas? And it's so then kind of about me. And for us to take a look at these wise guys and to say, what can I learn from? They brought gifts to Jesus. And during Epiphany, I can say, well, what gift do I have to bring to this King of Kings and Lord of Lords? Well, obviously, Jesus doesn't need anything. But he tells us that, where I do show up, because I do, is in those who are somehow poor in spirit. Either poor literally or somehow figuratively. And that when I show up there, it's particularly in Matthew 25, somebody needs a drink, somebody needs some food, whatever. And when you did that, maybe you didn't realize, but you did it for Jesus. And when you didn't do it, maybe you didn't realize, but you missed a Jesus opportunity. And Jesus feels pretty serious when he relates this part of Matthew. So it's a big deal. And, that's a difficult thing for us as humans. Because we like to relate to those who are like us, or maybe even, a little bit more successful than us, oftentimes. And to relate to those who have less can be awkward for us. And so we got to take a look at that. That's why Jesus had to say what he did in Matthew 25, because there's a human nature that is just kind of willing to let people be. And so you have the chance to ask, what is the gift you bring? And at this moment in time, when we talk so much about resolutions, and we don't do resolutions maybe as much as we did like 20 years ago, but we still very much think about when we flip the calendar to a new year, that this is a fresh start opportunity. And that's a wonderful psychological thing to be able to do. I mean, obviously it's just another day, and it really doesn't literally change much. But in our heads it does. So you can let the whole last year with whatever kind of stuff it had kind of dissipate. It is what it is. Learn from that which you need to, and you have this fresh beginning. So what are you going to do with that? And so much of these resolutions, or whatever it is that we talk about, really does talk about how it benefits me. And not even necessarily in an egotistical manner, but, of course, we all know the jokes that everybody's signing up for the gym now in January, right? That's what you do. You can see it on Facebook and in the paper or whatever, they have all sorts of specials. Even one that I'm actually connected with, I noticed they had a New Year's Day free group for you to show up. I didn't go. But Jesus will show up. And he says, it's not about blessing yourself. It's about blessing others. And oh man, this is hard on us human types again. The first shall be last and the last shall be first, he says. Yeah. If you want to be great, if you want to have power, you have to be a servant or slave. Servant and slave are the same word in the biblical languages. They don't differentiate like we do in English. So when you say servant, you go, oh, okay, like a butler. Would you like some tea with that? No. It more is like a slave. Oh. Because that's what servants were back in the biblical times, really. So how are you going to bless others? As a man and as a father, I feel rather keenly about Joseph of Mary and Joseph. He has nothing to do personally with the birth of Jesus. And yet he's going to be the stepdad to Jesus. And it is just sad that he is regarded so poorly in the Bible that evidently he dies sometime before Jesus gets to the cross, because there's reference to Mary and that Jesus wants to have John take care of Mary because Mary otherwise is now all alone. But they don't ever tell us what happens to Joseph. He's that insignificant. And sometimes I think, in a world where we still haven't gotten to where we need to be in the role of women, and you look at the biblical times when it's uncomfortable to say, but women were literally possessions. And so we've got a long ways to go. But there is this thing that I think our world needs to hear. If we're going to get women to where they need to be, it is for men as well. It can be difficult to be a father because there are literal ways in which you cannot come alongside an infant in the way that the woman can. And you feel like somehow you aren't equal in that. So I love this Joseph. And Kim's going to come forward. And at our recent Happy Birthday Jesus event, I sang this song, Joseph's song, that helps us to really kind of take a look at what was it like for him to be stepdad to Jesus, and for me to think about, well, okay, what am I going to do with this Jesus who was born into my life now, and he's growing and maturing, and we're moving toward crucifixion and resurrection? How do I fit into that plan for me as well?
How could it be, this baby in my arms, sleeping now so peacefully, the Son of God? The angel said, how could it be? Lord, I know he's not my own, not of my flesh, not of my bones. Still, Father, let this baby be the son of my love. Father, show me where I fit into this plan of yours. How can a man be father to the Son of God? Lord, for all my life I've been a simple carpenter. How can I raise a king? How can I raise a king? He looks so small, his face and hands so fair. And when he cries, the sun just seems to disappear. But when he laughs, it shines again. How could it be? Father, show me where I fit into this plan of yours. How can a man be father to the Son of God. Lord, for all my life I've been a simple carpenter. How can I raise a king? How can I raise a king? How could it be? This baby in my arms, sleeping now so peacefully, the Son of God. The angel said, how could it be?
Thank you, Kim. Especially if anyone watches on the video, that song is by Michael Card, and he's like my favorite Christian composer in my lifetime, and he's not a household name, and he deserves to be. Our friends at House of Prayer Church happen at this very same time to be asking what I think are delightful epiphany questions. They say, who is Jesus, and what are you going to do with him? Who is Jesus? Well, there are all sorts of names, titles in the Bible. Emmanuel, God with us, Prince of Peace, well, that for me is a really big one, Lord of Lords, and Kings of Kings. I mean, really, stop and think. We just kind of let that flitter off our tongue, but you look at kings, and he's the big king of them. And that his very name, Jesus, means Savior. And each of us, I think, need to answer that question for our own lives, because we each have unique aspects of life. We each have unique circumstances of life. So who Jesus is a little bit different for each of us, because Jesus is whoever you need him to really be. And now what are you going to do with that? That is the delight of Epiphany. Literally, we are called to have an epiphany of the heart at this time of year, as God's Spirit moves in and among us. And we have that opportunity, that chance for a fresh start. And it is in this way to follow Jesus in that servant nature, and to be resolved to bless others. Our buddy Martin Luther, and sometimes people get a little queasy with this, but he actually said at one point that we are all called to be little Christs. Christ, you know, is a Greek word. It's the same as the Hebrew word Messiah. If you translate it into English, it means anointed. There were kings who were anointed, and David is the one from whom Jesus will come in that lineage. So Jesus harkens back to this King David, the one who was a little c Christ, if you will. And in that sense, we all are called to be, if you like, a little c Christ. As God comes and moves within our lives, how is it that we can bless others? In a world that can be very dark, in a world that desperately needs that touch of God that brings light and salvation, the salvation that connects us all as God's people, and most pointedly then, reconnects us to God himself. Let's pray.